So, yeah, good. Actually, now we're still continuing reading the book, The Foundation of Buddhism, written by the Rupert Gethin, and then we come to the chapter 4, the Buddhist community. From last time, we have, I think now we come to page 91 under the subtitle, The Underlying Concern of the Vinaya. The last thing, the last discussion was about, anything related to the Buddhist community according to these books. We understand that a community here, including the monks, nuns, and the lay followers. So in other words, in this chapter, we are discussing about something about the community and what are these monks and nuns' duty are, and what the laypersons as a lay community do the duty, as well as what is the relationship between the monks and nuns and the layperson as a community. That's what the whole chapter is about. I think this chapter, the Buddhist community, is really important in a sense because, especially, even given that lots of people here are Chinese. So, then of course China have a long history of Buddhism, but then comparatively it looks like they not necessarily understand traditionally, and when I say traditional, I mean during the Buddha's time, how the community been understood. So of course, we know that when Buddhism come to different countries, it might alter a little bit of the sense of understanding community. But then, since we have studied the Buddhism as we have to find the fundamentally, or when I say fundamental, not, usually nowadays the word fundamental is not a very good term. If we want to go back to, usually we need to trace back to how the Buddha tried to understand what a community, or what kind of community he was trying to, or set up, or he think is an ideal community. So this is one of the importance of reading this book is also that, because lots of books may be telling you the community in the sense of their culture, but now we are actually just back to what the text telling us what the community supposedly to be, So that's what, then definitely if you have any question we can discuss. Let me just say something about what we have discussed last. The first one, we did talk about, when we know the community, we must understand during that time in India, they have two kind of religious kind of people. One is called the renunciated person, which is not necessarily very familiar to the Westerner in general. And the other type is called, they have the household life. So usually if those people are really serious about their religion, and either you choose to be renounce your life because you want to devote your whole spirit or your whole attention on the religious activities. So that's called a renounced life. That's why in India, even nowadays, so you do have a lot of religions, even you cannot name it, but in general Buddhism, people call them as a Hinduism, but actually they have so many different schools among them. Some of them, they believe they really have renounced their life or live in a very poverty, or some even just stay in the forest, or some, of course, they might stay, beside the channel, or and so forth, and then just in order to pursue their religious life. And the other, which is to become a really nowadays so popular, not only just popular, even in old days, become the dominant religion as a Brahmin. Brahmin is a term for Brahmin actually means the son of the Brahma, so it's called a Brahmin. Or you could understand now they call it clergy. The clergy. The clergy in India, of course, they call them a Brahmin. They can be Brahmin not because they are qualified only, because they have by birth as a Brahmin. You could not be a Brahmin because you learn. Say that, I finished my education on my Hinduism, I want a Brahmin. So first thing you want to check, who's your father? Were your father a Brahmin? If your father was not Brahmin, then you have no chance at all to become a Brahmin. So by birth, or that's what we call the caste system that in Indian society is very important. Even though, nowadays the caste system has been, really been condemned by so-called nowadays the modern society. Even in Indian constitution, this caste system has been abandoned and said that it's illegal if you are discriminate people just because by birth or what kind of caste. However, socially, still this is really highly practiced and highly, influence people's life, Anyway, so, but still we need to understand. But I think something they still didn't solve the problem. What about who can be a Brahmin. Because even though in India they try to be liberal on that kind of perspective, but then they, at the same time, they have to respect religion, you know. And then they have a difficulty to say, they would not claim that everybody can be Brahmin because for sure that if you want to be a Brahmin, you have to be born in a Brahmin family, okay? And the Brahmin family has to be so-called the father and mother side, the paternal side, particularly the paternal side, but then even your maternal side, your mother's side has to be a Brahmin as well, okay?
May I ask a question? My neighbor's across the street, his mother was Brahmin. Can he be Brahmin if he's
No, only the father.
Okay.
But they call it as a pure Brahmin. It has to be definitely the father side as the main key, but then the mother has to be Brahmin as well. If the mother is not Brahmin, you know, anyway, it's controversial. Yeah, a little bit controversial. Yeah. And then okay, but we must understand Buddhism came from that kind of society. So then we have the so-called these kind of renouncers, people who are renounce the family and then just devote to the religion. For example, like in America, if nowadays if you say that you want to renounce your family and then become any religion, so people think you're definitely something wrong with that person, you know. But I mean, we have to understand in Indian society think that very differently, because they think that if anybody really can denounce, it's not like a denounce, and really like detach themselves from the family is really like a brave person, really somebody that who are very unique, you know. Even though not necessarily their parents will agree, but they had to respect that because they knew that culturally they think that is not easy thing to do. Okay, it's very different kind of society. Anyway, so then Buddhism, of course, if you want to put it that way, then we must understand that Buddhism is belong to like a renowned side of the religion, not the household side of religion. Okay, and then then that's why we have from the first what we have discussed that before already. So you have the term called bhikshu as a Sanskrit, or bhikkhu in Pali, and the nun as a bhikshuni and the bhikkhuni. But originally, actually, the word bhikkhu or bhikshu in Sanskrit or Pali, or you say bhikkhuni or bhikshuni in Sanskrit or Pali, but actually the word actually in original means something like somebody who are begging something, which is in Indian cultures regarded as something very noble kind of act that you do not attach to anything, but you only begging your food, just to get the food in order to sustain your physical body so that you could do your spiritual practice. But then, of course, as I say, cultural changes later on when Buddhism transmitted to China, for example. Chinese people hate beggar, and you think beggar is the useless person. So that's why the word bhikkhu and bhikshu, even unless you are really monk and you study, you know the original mean a beggar, kind of like that, something begging a thing, you know. I mean by the bhikkhu and bhikshu, but then the Chinese must change the way to tell the people bhikkhu and bhikshu as mean someone who actually giving a chance for people to get marriage, you know, 就是福田，也种福田 in Chinese. So this is definitely, as I say, culturally you need to have a kind of new interpretation in a certain way when that Buddhism transmitted to other places like in China, okay. For example, now of course, I don't think that even if I speak Chinese in China, then I say, what do you mean by the bhikkhu? If I speak it that way, people just think it's not very noble, you know. But in India, they think that is really noble if you could do that way, that you give up the thing and then you just want to bear the food for your spiritual practices, okay. All right, we know that already, and then I think that there was certain term we did discuss as well, that what the monks supposed to be when they renounce. Of course, they have to follow the ordination procedure. In earlier time, the ordination procedure is very simple. Whenever the Buddha agree with you, you could just join the order. But then later on, or even when I say later on, it doesn't mean that not even before the Buddha passed away, then the procedure become more complicated. So that you had to take the ordination. The original word means upasampada, but actually if you look at the original meanings, upasampada means you are kind of like you want to set foot on association, In other words, definitely in English we translate as ordination, 就是出家, In Chinese they translate as renouncing actually. No, but the word actually Upasambhada originally means you set foot on, associate, associate the community, kind of like that, okay? And then even in ordination, so you have this ceremony called Brahmacharya, okay, and as a novice, and then as either a monk or nun, then you have this novice training as well as the fully ordained, okay? Then we do have a term for that when you are a novice monk called Samanera, or Stramanera in Sanskrit, or if you are nuns or novice nun called Stramaneni, or the nun as a Straman are the bhikkhuni, right? Anyway, and then we also discussed that even after they took this Brahmacharya in Sanskrit, or the ordination, they have agreed they observe the rules, right? As a monks, if you look at the page 87, then the rules has, they have all these kind of rules to follow. But here we have discussed that already. Generally, for a monk, we have 227 rules. But in the different schools, in a different school, and they have different kind of rules. But nowadays, we popular is that since most of people here maybe speak Chinese, so and then the book highly based on the Pali understanding. So, and then for the Pali monk, the Theravada monk, and then you have 227 rules, and then in the Chinese tradition you have 249, but generally we say 250, just say exact, but rules. And the two traditions, the rules actually are not much different. Okay, even the order is almost the same, but the Chinese rule have more. They add some other thing there. Is mostly about how you should respect the stupa, the ta, four ta, the stupa. Okay, which is completely is not there in the Pali tradition. Okay, and then I guess we also discussed already a note on the Buddhist nuns. Basically about how the nuns were, I think it was how the nuns were formed, and then kind of like a status of woman, and as well as nowadays, even though the Theravada tradition, the nuns tradition has died out, but then still in Chinese, still retain that nun tradition. And in Tibetan Buddhism as well as the Pali Buddhism, so-called Theravada Buddhism, the nuns are died out, but then still the women become like a nuns, but not necessarily as the bhikshuni, like those who have upholding the bhikshuni rules, And then now we are going to talk about the underlying concern of the Vinaya. Okay, Vinaya. Let me just refresh the term. The word Vinaya in Chinese is called 戒律的律. The Vinaya is different from the term Sila. Okay, usually Sila 就是戒. We must 戒 mean a precepts. Precepts is to Buddhism. Precept is something that it's kind of universal. And when you say Vinaya, it's more like when you join a community, you have to agree with the community. Like the community rules or the disciplines, right? That's meant by Vinaya. Okay, for example, to Buddhism understand any person, even though whether you're Buddhist or not a Buddhist, you definitely must have the Sila. You must have. Sometimes we translate as a precept, but the best you can understand as a morality. The morality, like you need to learn. Killing itself is not really a good thing. For example, stealing the thing is not a good thing, and so having the sexual misconduct and so forth, So that's what we call as the precepts. So, but in Buddhism, usually understand that it's not because whatever religion you believe is something that actually universally has to be agreed upon. That we are trying to be that way. But when you follow the monk, being a monk or being a nun, then of course, those are the things that you need to learn. You need to follow and practice. But at the same time, then you are having some other thing more that you agree with, that when you join the community, then you need to follow those Vinaya, the 戒律的律. But I want to emphasize this because in Chinese, the problem is that because the Chinese They always say the word, usually when you speak the word, particularly when you, even something when you write nowadays, that you don't like to have a single word like 戒 and 律. So that's why we say 戒律, 戒律. But actually in real Buddhism, 戒 is sila, 律 is vinaya. Okay. So it's two separate words, and actually carry very different meaning. You know, one is kind of like you when you join a company, something like that. You have to agree with the company rules, and then you have to study all these rules, and you think, okay, right, I agree with that. Then you join. When you breach the rule, then you are basically you have to agree with them that they will do. When I say punishment, I mean that you have to learn how to how to say. I forgot the term. Kind of like you have to, once you have a breach a rule, and then definitely you need to learn how to confess with the rule, that, you know, and so forth. Okay. That's why I think we talked a little bit about when you join the order, you have to become monks or nuns, then you need to follow the Vinaya, right? Allow me to use the original word Vinaya, because if you read any Buddhist term, we don't need to translate that. If we translate, we might be translate as a monastic codes. Okay. So, all right, it say that we have to learn why the Vinaya is been promulgated by the Buddha. There are 4 reasons. First, if we look at the page number 91, almost like the last line. Okay, the unity and cohesion of the Sangha. The Sangha means the communities, particularly here refer to the monastic Sangha. Okay. The second, the spiritual life. And the third, the dependence of the Sangha upon the wider community. Okay. And the number 4, the appearance of the Sangha in the eyes of the community. So, it says that this requires some elaboration. Do you want to read that maybe? Just to start read that. The Buddhist monastic community. Okay.
Oops, I lost my page. Sorry, I'm right there. 92. What's it? Just a second.
It was under the subtitle, the underlying concern of the Vinaya.
I tapped too quickly, so I have it.
That's helpful because we don't have page numbers.
Oh, I see.
No, I have it now.
Yeah,
Then I would
Thank
just
you.
helpful with say underlying concern of Vinaya. Okay,
Yeah,
the
so
third.
exactly.
All right, thank you.
So, the Buddhist monastic community is the prerequisite for the existence of Buddhism in a given society. As we saw in Chapter 2, in a traditional Buddhist society, it is only through contact with the monastic community that the laity can have any knowledge of the Buddha's teachings.
The
Buddha's teachings. The Sangha lives the teaching, preserves the teaching as scriptures, and teaches the wider community. Without the Sangha, there is no Buddhism. The Vinaya thus attempts to provide a framework which renders the Sangha a stable and viable institution, showing considerable concern for unity and the settling of disputes. The Sangha The formal hierarchy of the Sangha is based on seniority calculated from the time and date of one's ordination. The existence and survival of the Sangha for well over 2 millennia in diverse cultures is a measure of the Vinaya's success in establishing a structure that is tight enough to prevent disintegration of the community, but flexible enough to allow for adaptation to particular circumstances.
All right, why don't we just, anyone want to read the next paragraph with the life as a monk? Do you want to read it? Or?
I can keep going.
If the life as a monk is fundamental to Buddhist version of the spiritual life, then it follows that one of the Vinaya's prime concern must be to regulate a way of life that conduces to the realization of the Buddhist path. The Vinaya's success in this respect is perhaps harder to gauge. There are no statistic for the number of realized saints, bodhisattvas, string attainers, once returner, never returners, and arahats. It has fostered yet the widespread view that, for example, the Thai monk Achan Mu, who died in 1949, was an arahant, indicates that enlightenment is still regarded by some as realistic aspiration for the Buddhist monk, even if the prevalent attitude in some circles is that arahantship is no longer possible. The sanctity or otherwise of past and present members of the Sangha is hardly a matter to be determined by academic inquiry. Nevertheless, the Vinayas concerned with the minutia of monks' handling of the
requisites
exhibits awareness of human foibles, as well as of the mind's ingenuity and even deviousness in the face of rules and regulations designed to curb greed, aversion, and delusion. Anyone genuinely attempting to put this way of life into practice is very soon likely to be made aware of the multifarious way in which he or her greed, aversion, and delusion works. Furthermore, the number of minor rules concerning more general behavior seem intended to make for a certain alertness or mindfulness, one of the mental quality to be cultivated in meditation.
All right, why don't we just read the next paragraph? We can have a little discussion. The final two concerns of Vinaya. We can just turn around, and if there's no one, then you would.
The final two concerns of Vinaya, the dependence the Sangha upon the wider community, and the appearance of Sangha in the eye of that community are interlinked. The Buddhist monk may be one who renounces society, but the genius of the Vinaya is that, having invited the monk to give up society, it then requires him to live in dependence upon it, thereby forcing him back into the relationship with it. It has sometimes been suggested that the Buddha originally intended to institute only a movement of committed ascetic, removed from society. These are the true and original Buddhists. From this perspective, the involvement of the lay followers represents something of an afterthought on the part of the Buddha. If the basic conception of the Vinaya is attributable to the Buddha himself, then such an interpretation is hardly sustainable, for the interaction of the monastic and lay communities is integral to the way of life set out by the Vinaya.
Okay, any question about what we have just read? Or anything that you want to comment upon? Okay, but if not, then I think the next two paragraphs, I don't think that we need to read it, but I just generally summarize it, Basically, I think basically that in the Vinaya, I guess there was some of the essence about, the essence, kind of like the purpose of the Vinaya. One of the purposes, what the monks should do is that there were few things it is understood as like, a monk should not handle money. He should not eat food that has not received from someone else. He should not dig the ground or have it dug or and so effectively prohibited by the famine. And also, actually, in the old days, strictly he should not store food unless sick, and then only for 7 days. And look at it now. You can see that in those days, in old days, that when you become like a sangha, especially the monastic members, that a lot of strict rules now not necessarily I'm actually following now. Okay, and actually he is also discouraged from cooking, but it's very on the contrary nowadays in Chinese. But if you're the monks and nuns, especially unfortunately the nuns, so one of the big job is to cook, and then when any ceremony, the nuns have to really be busy cooking, and then the lay people will come to, maybe certainly they do their services in the Buddhism, and then the cooking being served, But say that I used to look after like a certain monastery, the same thing as even in New York, you know. And then one of the big thing that difficult for me is that to arrange people, monks and nuns, when they're going to cook. Because we need to rotate the cooking, you know, and also someone have to be in charge of the kitchen. But if you look at even the system in China later on, they changed that also in a big monastery. So and they in the Chinese system they changed, like, you know, there were few of the very important positions as the monks or nuns. One of the important positions is to be a kitchen, somebody who in charge of the kitchen, because eating is really the big deal. And that is really difficult to tackle with, because if you know, say the food are cooking not too good, not necessarily you have to cook, because since you're in charge, you have to demand them how they should cook the food. Imagine that people, if they're picky and they will hate that food, and they would start to do, you know, a lot of things will happen. You know, you can imagine, because you have to eat the food every day. And if you only cook like when I used to look after the monastery in upstate, basically in New York, and then one of the big job is to how you should solve the problem about food. Okay.
I think I saw you guys at Panera.
Huh?
I think I saw you guys at Panera.
Panera, I see.
Yeah.
No, that's another thing, that Panera. But I'm just saying that in a monastery now, in a temple, actually that's but if according actually to the Vinaya, we are discouraged actually so-called a good vihara, so-called a good temple. Even traditionally, it's believed that the best temple, it's nothing to involve in the kitchen. And they should not have a kitchen even. So, but that definitely now, but I mean, this is what we are learning, what the Buddha idea in old day. But now, of course, as I say, it could change already, because when Buddhism came to China, for example, if you don't cook, you are based on people begging food, they say you are a beggar, you are lazy, you are doing nothing, you are what? It's really because of Chinese culture. I have to force the Buddhism when they have to root it in China to change the institution itself, you know. Okay. So, but now this is the one thing is good to read both, because you know how it originally been that way. Then you somehow know what is culturally Buddhism as a Chinese Buddhism, and what is really the Buddhist idea as a Buddhism means. For example, like when I become a monk, actually, people were surprised that they thought, I mean, as a Chinese, they always say a monk must know how to cook. But I'm on the contrary, I don't know how to cook. I only learned how to cook when I studied in England, because I have to cook, otherwise I have no food to eat. Actually, in the tradition, so when you're a monk, you are not supposed to cook. It's because you're only supposed to accept the food from people cook for you, whatever they cook for you, unless you can decline the food by the reason because it's bad for your health when you are not healthy. Otherwise, even if it's a strict stand, even if you somehow suspect he might spit on that, you still have to eat it. But unless you saw his spit, because then you know he's offering your food out of disrespect. Of course, then you don't accept the food when out of disrespect. So you cannot accept that. Okay, then and then of course I guess the other paragraph is saying that then the monk, the lay people, it's basically is important to support the monks by offering them the robes, the food, the lodging, and also the medicine. Okay, because they have to think that the monks and nuns are following something, the spiritual life. Actually, the original mean brahmacharya. Mean they follow the spiritual life. But we must understand the word brahmacharya in Sanskrit or in Pali. It always carry with the person, the monks and nuns stay in celibacy. Okay, you must understand that. That's how the Indian understand. Okay, but I'm sure that Buddhism changed a lot also when the Buddhism came to Japan. And because like in Japanese monks they can marry, for example, they are more like a householder, but householder household practice. But then we must understand the Japanese monks do not have Vinaya, okay? They don't have the Vinaya ceremony. They have the ceremony to observe a kind of precept called the Bodhisattva precept, 就是菩萨戒, but they don't observe 比丘戒 or 比丘尼戒. They don't have the Vinaya, okay? Because in the Vinaya it's very clear you have to stay in the celibacy. But now we need to understand not only because of Vinaya, even in the Indian understanding the word 犯恨, Brahmacharya, the word Brahmacharya in Chinese called 犯恨. So actually it always carry the meaning of celibacy. Okay. All right. Why don't we just read and then you do have a. When you look at when you talk about people who come to ordination and they become a monk and nun, but do not think that there are only one type of monks and nuns. So there are many types of it. This is what we are going to discuss about the next paragraph, from wandering to settled life, forest dwellers and the town dwellers. Okay. Is it? Do you want to read? Okay.
95.
Yeah, from the subtitle, from wandering to settled life. Yeah.
Forest
Dwellers.
and town
Dwellers.
dwellers.
Okay.
The idea that the lifestyle of Buddhist monk is founded upon is that of the homeless wanderer, who, having renounced all possessions and gone forth from the household life, dresses in robes made from discarded rags, bags for his food, and takes as his dwelling the forest, a mountain cave, or the foot of a tree. Perhaps one of the most uncompromising description of the renouncer's lifestyle is that found in a point near the beginning of the Sutta Nipata. Here the renouncer is advised to wander alone, free from any tie of family and friendship, like the single horn of the Indian rhinoceros. Although Buddhist tradition has not been this account as a general prescription for Buddhist monastic life, there has been a tendency for modern scholarship to take the kind of picture it presents at face value. The history of the Sangha in ancient India can then be read as a series of compromises that amount to gradual corruption of the ancient idea. On this view, the monk at first wandered completely homeless in their single-minded intent on the goal of
Nirvana.
Increasing numbers of spiritually inexperienced and immature monks made it necessary for the Buddha to lay down more rules and regulations. Step by step, this led to the institutionalization of the Sangha. Particularly significant in this process was a rule which is said to have been laid down in response to complaints that Buddhist monks wandering about during the monsoon rainy season were causing damage to plants and small creatures. This rule therefore requires monks to take up residence in one place for the 3 months of the rains. This consequence of this way, the establishment of residential monasteries and the gradual evolution of the more settled way of life.
All right, thank you. Do you want to read the next paragraph?
Sure.
Yeah.
But there are problems with such a model of the evolution of the Sangha. To begin with, as the more recent work of Mohan
Vijayaratna.
Thank you, and Gregory Chopin has shown, the Vinaya text as we have them certainly already assume the development of a settled way of life, and the picture of the typical monk's way of life reflected in them is not exactly that of the homeless wanderer. Chopin takes this as reason to conclude that the Vinaya texts as we have them reflect a state of affairs long after the death of the Buddha, and in their present form must belong to a rather later period than is usually assumed, the early centuries of the Christian era. And yet, as Stephen Collins has pointed out in his introduction,
Vijayaratna's
Wijnanatra's study of the early Pali sources brings out the extent to which they contain a coherent, developed, and well-integrated conception of monastic life. And this suggests that we must redraw our picture of the Buddhist monk as exclusively a homeless forest dweller, even in the lifetime of the Buddha. Chopin might respond that in pushing the existence of a settled monastic way of life too far back in time, we assume too much development in too short a period of time and deny the Sangha any history. But the fact remains that we are still unclear of the extent to which the Sangha can be regarded as having a pre-Buddhist history. That is, a comparison with a Jain monastic organization indicates that certain rules and principles, including the institution of a residential reigns, are held in common. This suggests that either Buddhism and Jainism have borrowed from each other, or that both have drawn on a common heritage. It may well be the case that the varied renouncer tradition from which both Jainism and Buddhism emerge had already developed certain institutional patterns by the time of the Buddha, and that these had been drawn upon and adapted to suit the characteristically Buddhist version of a mendicant order.
Yeah, could you just read the next paragraph too?
Okay.
Yeah.
Again, as Gregory Chopin has made clear, if we want to form some idea of the reality of ancient Buddhism, in addition to the evidence of ancient texts, we must take into account the archaeological evidence of ancient inscriptions and other artifacts. Dating from the 3rd or 2nd centuries BCE, these reflect the reality of how Buddhism was actually practiced less problematically than the ideals of the text. Once again, the pictures that can be drawn on the basis of these makes it clear that the homeless, that's the word I don't know.
Mendicant.
Mendicant wanderer, meditating in the forest, intent on nirvana, was neither the only nor probably the numerically dominant actuality.
All right. So, do you want to read the next one? Yeah. For a general picture.
For a general picture of Buddhist monastic life in ancient India and Sri Lanka through the centuries of the first millennium CE, the most generally useful textual sources, apart from the various Vinayas, are the Pali commentaries and the records of 3 Chinese Buddhist pilgrims. Fa Xian, who spent some 15 years traveling in northern India and Sri Lanka at the beginning of the 5th century. Xuanzang, of course, who traveled throughout India in the first half of the 7th century, and Yi Jing, who visited India and the Malay archipelago towards the end of the 7th century. Archaeological and inscriptional evidence comes from a great variety of monastic sites across India and Sri Lanka.
What are these suggestions? Can you read that?
Yeah.
These sources suggest what?
These sources suggest that monks lived as more or less permanent residents in monasteries.
Vihara, Arama.
That usually consisted of a number of buildings: residential quarters, a teaching hall, a
Posata hall,
posata hall for the fortnightly recitation of the monastic rule. The religious heart of a monastery was threefold: a stupa containing relics, ideally of the Buddha or some acknowledged saint, a Bodhi tree, and
asvata.
Asvata, or Ficus religiosa.
Yeah, a type of the tree.
Okay. The type of tree the Buddha gained awakening under, often growing on a platform. And finally, a shrine hall or image house. All 3 would have been the object of considerable devotional practice by monks and laity alike. Monasteries varied enormously in size. Fa Xian records that the Abhayagiri Vihara had
Anuradhapura,
the ancient capital of Sri Lanka, housed 5,000 monks, while Yi Jing states that at the famous monastic university of Nalanda in eastern India, there were some 3,000 residents. Such monastic establishments included kitchens, refectories, latrines, bathing facilities, and libraries. Whether or not the figures of the Chinese pilgrims are exaggerated, the remains of these monastic complexes are impressive in themselves and bear witness to their grand past. Patronized by royalty and the wealthy, many monasteries have had considerable endowments in the form of property, lands, and other material goods. Thus, in both India and Sri Lanka, we find the development of a system already adumbrated in the Vinaya itself, whereby monasteries' requirements for food were provided by the produce of land farmed on behalf of the monastery by laity who received a share in return. Large monasteries are also employed considerable numbers of lay servants of various sorts in order to handle donations of money and goods and oversee their running. The canonical Vinaya sources refer to the office of
Kapiya Karaka.
Sanskrit
Karapikara.
A layman who makes allowable
Kapiya
gifts that would otherwise, according to the strictures of the Vinaya, not be permissible. This is relevant especially to donations of land and money, which individual monks and nuns are strictly forbidden from accepting or handling, but which the Kapiya Karika could receive and administer on their behalf. The Sangha could thus become the effective owner of considerable property, wealth, and resources, while individual monks also came to exercise rights over property, which in certain circumstances extended to being able to leave it to their monastic pupils.
Okay. Now, good. I mean, I think before I say anything first, I mean, any comment or any question, whatever. You know, after writing this, you might have something in your head. You have question. Yeah.
That's quite a shift, is what I can say, from somebody who's begging and not allowed to cook to somebody who's got property that can pass it on to heirs of a sort.
Yeah, that's right. Really big shift. But I mean, still, historically, we're still not sure when the shift starts. Whether that even during the Buddha's time or not. But then for sure that if you look from archaeological evidence, this kind of shift actually definitely it's from even before Christ, few hundred years is there already. So in other words, the Buddha passed away a few hundred years. Definitely this sort of shifting is, this sort of a constitution or institutionalization is changed. Being that way already. Okay. But it depends on how you really look at it, because actually one of the analysts saying that it's why Buddhism are very successfully spread even during that after the Buddha passed away. One of the reasons actually is because of shifting too. Depends on how you look at it, because then when the monks are all mendicant wanderers, that you only just stay in the forest or the cave, or even maybe you just stay because people giving you housing, you just staying and so forth, then you would not have a kind of like strong institution so that you could manage the whole system well. And because of shifting, definitely there were some other argument probably from the monastic side especially, then you definitely need a land, a place, and then that you could train your pupils, as well as then people could come together and meet the monk and learn something, so that they know their purpose of why they will have to support the monastic members and so forth. There was different opinions about that. Yeah. And any other questions? Anything that on comment what you read you maybe have? No questions. Very strange. A lot of people must.
How often they do the posada?
Posada actually by rule usually you have to done that once a month. But then sometimes you also suggest that you have to try it twice a month. That means the full moon day and the new moon day. But definitely full moon day would be really, it's kind of like definitely a temple usually, like here in ancient time even, the temple will have three. One is that the prasad, what is the name already? Suddenly I forget. The stupa and Bodhi tree, and one is that
Triangle image house.
Yeah, Bodhisattva hall. Yeah, and the Bodhisattva hall. So that normally that day the monks or nuns they have to recite the Vinaya rules, and during that every full moon day. Yeah.
Actually, I have a question. I heard that on the Theravada tradition or Theravada temple, you need to bury some stones.
Yeah, that's called sima. That way of term. Well, it's like that when you build a Bodhisattva hall. Of course, there's a certain. When we say we learn in Vinaya, it's not only just the rule, but you also have to learn somehow how do you lay this kind of the so-called Bodhisattva. Actually, there's a carry the meaning purified too. Meaning the place is pure, and then the place is pure. So then you need to lay four stone to signify that that place is normally you don't go in, unless you just you have confessed your you could say confess. It's not confess. You have to first clear your how to say clear your precepts. Kind of like if you have if let's say if you have offend or certain rule, then you need to confess to the monk. So I did that, and then because you by confession, so then of course then you bring back your rules, and then only that when you're completely then you could go to the Bodhisattva rule. Yeah, the fourth stone is just a way to signify that the pure place that people only monks and go there for to do the confession. Monks and nuns, sorry. So it's a boundaries, yeah.
Because one time I was talking to Hubao and Stephen. He was when I think it was Kantu when he was going forth, and we were talking about. He was telling me about the stones and everything, and he was like, in the Chinese temple don't have those stones buried under the temple. And it's like,
actually, they do.
They do?
Very few now. They do. In ancient time, when I say ancient in China, you do find that even like Baima Si and all these old temples, they definitely have that. Okay. Because that's definitely is a rule. When any ceremony going on, really for giving the ordination, they must have this kind of thing. Yeah. But now,
yeah, he was saying that
change now.
If you don't have those stones there, how can you have the ordination? That's what he was saying.
Yes.
Could you please explain why certain Buddhist places, say the one over on Germantown Road, they have the stupas and such, and yet I don't know of one on these grounds?
Okay, maybe the best to say, I mean, here you want to say the mention, but let's just explain one thing first. In ancient time, I mean, it looks like the monastic members do not possess anything at all, right? And then later on, we do have a kind of like, definitely sometimes you could have a lodging place to stay. But that's for sure, even during the Buddha's time, we have the vihara. Vihara or called arama. Actually, the vihara means a place to stay. Arama, actually, it's more like, the place has to be like more like a hermitage, kind of like you maybe a lot of forest around, and then you might have a lot of empty space or open space like that. So that's the name. Why they have a two name is one show it could be just a lodging place, not much of other spaces, but the other indicate you have a vast space then with forest as well as with the open space. Anyway. But then later on, when the Buddha passed away, and the monastery looks like, definitely there were a few things important. One is that the place to do meditation, and they added one place that for lodging, and then the body tray or the stupa. Okay, so, and if the temple here actually the main thing you could be said. For religious significance, for the Buddhist significance, is a three things. Bodhisattva, because for the monk have to chant the Vinaya every full moon day at least. And the body tree is actually, during that, in early time, we do not have Buddha statue. We started to have Buddha statue is only really just actually after century, okay? Because even though that's because influenced by Alexander the West. Otherwise, we do not have Buddha statue. Even though people now think that Buddhism is like kind of more like idol worship, it's not true. Actually, when Buddhism started, we don't have a Buddha statue. And that's why what represents the Buddha statue, you could say, is the Bodhi tree and the stupa. And because the Bodhi tree represents the wisdom that the Buddha sit under the tree to attain enlightenment, so, in that kind of way that you could grow Bodhi tree much easier also. So, and then it become a place that to remember the Buddha, because we don't have a statue. And the second stupa is definitely the Indian culture. In old day, the stupa is somehow, not necessarily like nowadays what you see, but the stupa is kind of like, I forgot in the Indian sub-Aboriginal people here, they have a name called rind, right? I forgot the name. Kind of like a hill. A small hill,
it's
like a little,
pillars,
yeah, kind of like a dome, right? Like a dome, something like that. Okay. In Indian, even in the American Indian, for example, yeah, it's.
Oh, you meant American Indian.
Yeah, American Indian. No, the American Indian. They also like they worship like a little hill,
right?
And somehow like that. Actually, the original very old stupa. It's in India it's the same. It's very small, and then you use the soil, and they make up the dome. But then of course the dome is different from the other because in Indian culture, who have this honor to be worshipped or be honored to put in this kind of dome is only the saint or the great king, the king that believe the justice king. Or you are the kind of religious, really powerful leader and think that you are really powerful in attainment. So the same thing when the Buddha passed away, and then his relic, when I say relic, it's not only just what you see, the relic, but it's the bone or the teeth and everything. Everything is that belong to the Buddha. So, and then divided into 8 parts. Actually divided into 9 parts. 8 parts was divided, and the 9 parts were by one kind. Because when the Buddha passed away, so many kings in India at that time. Because at that time, India have kind of like 16 kind of kingdoms there. But then everyone wanted the Buddha relic. They think that's the most holy thing. And then they build this stupa. As I said earlier on, the stupa kind of like a dome one. And later on, then of course, then we make it become nowadays different kind of shape. So stupa is the earlier time is always represent the body of the Buddha. Okay, maybe make it this way. So nowadays, I guess like a temple now, because it's almost very hard to imagine if it's a temple no Buddha statue. So kind of Buddha statue has somehow replaced the status of the stupa.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the tree as well.
The Bodhi tree is true. Bodhi tree is because I guess
you cannot grow it here.
we cannot grow it here also, but still is highly respected in like in Theravada country, like in Thailand, especially in Sri Lanka. If a temple no Bodhi tree is not a temple. So, and the stupa, of course, if you look at Sri Lanka, especially if you are become like a institution like very big, then the stupa almost like become the center of their token, kind of like they have a really huge stupa like a mountain. I'm not joking. There were some of their when I was in Sri Lanka, they were one of the places we used to pass by. We thought it's a mountain. Only then later on, they found actually it's not a mountain, it's a stupa. And they excavated it, and it really is a stupa. Imagine how big is that. So, very, very big, If you go to Sri Lanka, I think the biggest stupa is in Sri Lanka, very big.
Yeah, I was looking for a picture. I have a picture of
Yeah.
stupa in here,
Yeah.
but I'm not finding it.
No, you just find stupa in Sri Lanka, you definitely see a lot.
No, I wasn't in Sri Lanka. I was in
No, no.
Germantown.
No, Germantown. In Germantown, actually, there's one of Korean temple. I think not far from here.
Right.
They do have a small this type of stupa, but the earlier stupa may be more like a dome, the round. and they may have something on top of it. Yeah.
Yeah, your description was good.
Okay. Okay, and right. If no any further question or comment, I think one other thing is here what we have discussed is about, even idealistically that they were all earlier the monks almost like homelessly, no any possession. But then later on it looks like then you do have a place. It doesn't mean it's a possession for the monks and nuns, but at least that they really kind of like the place, and it become kind of somehow become sometimes even they will pass down, they will extend that kind of place of the land to their monastic pupils,